Well, good morning, K&L Home Church. It is time for us to get our study on. We are going to continue in our service that we are getting our world view from Deuteronomy. And we're going to continue today where we left off at last week. Santa has got a little helper today. Say hi, Ezra.
Hi.
Tell them whose baby you are.
Papa.
Say,
Papa.
Papa's baby. Anyhow, I like for the kids to hear about God. I like for them to hear what we do here at K&L Home Church. I encourage all of you. I know the Beck's got some youngins, and Kevin and Pam's got some youngins, and don't do that. But let them hear you pray, church. Let them hear you pray. Pray with them every day. Okay, so we're going to pray, and we're going to start our service together. He's going to go for a walk with his Nana, but I wanted him to open with us this morning. So, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, bow your head. Heavenly Father, we thank you for being with us today. Bless this church service. And thank you for forgiving us. We love you. Amen. All right, let's send you over to Nana, and she'll take it from here, and we'll let them say bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Here, get over and say bye.
Bye.
All right, thanks, son. All right, go to Nana.
Are you just going to do the rest?
Yeah, I'm going to do the rest, and I'll be done by the time you get back.
Oh, I want to hear the microphone.
You don't hear the microphone. It doesn't make any sound. Okay? All right. Okay, everyone. Look, I sent you one new slide. Two, three. No, there's about 3 new slides in here. Here's what I want to do today. We spent some time looking at, the world view. Remember the eye? I've got them on your slides here. Let's just work our way down through them today. And here's what I think is going to be interesting that I hope you find a blessing. I want you to see how Yahweh, God the Father, has addressed these rebellions, and keeping in mind that you're dealing with, a Father, Yahweh, his Son, Jesus, and the sons of God. There's a lot going on here, and I kind of want you to make a connection today with the day of Pentecost. You guys know for 6 years, I preached almost exclusively about speaking in tongues and how speaking in tongues is the fulfillment of faith. This is what makes the understanding so powerful, is that in the rebellion, you've got the firstborn, the children, the sons of God. You've got the sons of God rebelling against their father, and they're taking human wives and they're making giants. We talked about that a lot. Well, the Son of God is addressing all of the rebellions, and he's fixing the rebellions and making something happen. And that's why, faith is so important that you understand it. In the new covenant, what God is doing is he's taking some family members that have rebelled, the fallen angelic realm. You've heard me talk about the Watchers. You've heard me talk about their bloodline and what they've accomplished, what their goal was. And we're going to speak a little bit about that today, because I don't think it's enough just to give the impression, because in Deuteronomy, or excuse me, in Genesis 6, 4 little verses is all we're really getting when we're talking about these sons of God, seeing the daughters of men, and taking wives of whomever they choose. You're only given this much. It's kind of like a very densely coded 4 verses to the first century church and to the ancient Israelites. That little tiny bit, it would be like me saying, make America great again. To us, that's just a catchphrase because the current president wears it on his hat. You hear it all the time. But we know when we hear make America great again, it brings back to our memory, an elevator ride where Donald Trump comes down, where he announces, where he goes to rally after rally. So to say make America great again as a slogan, it really captures a lot more than just that phrase. Well, that's the way they looked at Genesis 6, 1 through 4. They're looking at it like the author's Moses. He's writing it from the idea that I don't need to go into the deep history of the Nephilim. I don't need to spend time telling the audience I'm writing to about the book of Enoch. I don't need to tell this audience the full story. I can capture it in 4 verses. But for us as students of Scripture, we need to know the backstory. And that's why we spend so much time, because we want to have the same worldview as the audience that Moses was writing to and who the New Testament authors are writing to, because they've all obtained the same worldview. Well, we want to show you today how does the day of Pentecost play into the worldview? So we're going to start on our way down there, and I want to just give you this much reference to the Nephilim and the Watchers and their objective, because if you're not careful, what you'll end up doing, you'll think that, well, there's these Watchers, and they're supposed to be assisting us in getting, they're Watchers and they're supposed to be helping. But if you're not careful, you'll get to the thing where you're thinking, well, they just saw the daughters of men and it was just lust run amok. And it's because the Bible's filled with that kind of language, and we understand it because we are, we're trained as modern Christians to be on the lookout for temptations. And you remember we talked a lot about for 6 years, the Bible's a lot more than sin management. And what you don't realize when you look at this is what is, to use modern technologies and to modern thinking, what is the modus operandi of any world dictator in history that wanted a global conquest? Well, the very first step, every one of them had it. If you go back and look in history, read up on Hitler, read up on Pol Pot, read up on Joseph Stalin, read up on the Chinese and their Red Army. What was that guy's name? I can't think of it now. But what they all have in common is the very first thing on their agenda is we have to destroy the family. And that's right now happening in our time. This isn't something that we have to read about in 1945. We don't have to go back that far. What is happening in the world, in America, is there is a movement underway, and it has been for a long time, to destroy the family unit and replace it. Remember, that's the objective. Replace what God has established as the orderly transference of power. In God's mind, as he's recognized as a father. Well, father is a family term, and he's dealing with sons again. What is that? A family term. And what is occurring here is these sons are looking for an avenue, a pathway where they can obtain their inheritance. I hope this rings a bell for you. But they can obtain an inheritance. They can obtain something from their father. They have no capacity to create, solar systems, planets, and all this stuff. So they wait until this created order is established. And then what they want to do is create their own bloodline. So it's not just emotion run amok. It's much more sinister. And I want to get into that a little bit. So the first slide, very familiar to you. Again, we don't need to read it, but here's some additional things that we haven't talked about. The government of these watchers is seen in this one picture when you see the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. It keeps this up in front of you. But I put a new word in here, and I want you to see this word, and we're going to link it into the day of Pentecost. And I think you're going to see, wow, it really changes the way you understand the worldview, and it should just make your jaw drop when you see how the Father has taken it upon himself to fix this problem that we're all part of. And it says, when the Most High, and here's the word I want you to pay attention to. Now, the English word is apportioned, but I want you to keep this in mind, that the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures is called the Septuagint. When these ancient scholars of Hebrew wanted to translate this into Greek, look at that Greek word I put in brackets right there. It's a compound word. The first word is dia, and then the second one is marizo. Now, connect this thinking. When you look at dia marizo, is it apportioned? Yeah, but it's got another layer to it. Marizo means to divide, and the dia aspect on the prefix, which you've heard me say this a lot. I'm often frustrated when the writers put a prefix on a word and it has no influence on the translation. I just think, marizo all by itself is a verb. It means to divide. But dia has an impact on it, where the writer's wanting to talk about a thorough division. And so it's when the Most High thoroughly divided the nations, and thus you see this map. And I'm kind of hoping that you don't get tired of hearing and seeing this, of his dividing, and that's a different word there, dividing up the sons of humankind. He fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of God. And there's that family language. So I want you to start tuning your ears into words that the authors use that communicate a world view. And go back and keep reminding yourself, why did Pastor Wade spend 6 years beating the table saying the law of Moses is prohibited from finding its way into the new covenant? Well, now you're starting to understand the covenant with Abraham is a global covenant. The covenant of the law of Moses is isolated to Israel only. Once Israel put Jesus on the cross, once the Jews killed Jesus, their place as having a special assignment, that played out. And now on the backside of the cross, they are just one nation on this map, because faith is what God is going to use in the new covenant to make a deposit into everybody on this map, whomever he chooses. He said it, I will forgive who I'll forgive. How do you say it? I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy to. And he just makes the statement that I am a sovereign God. This is my covenant. Those sons of God are my sons of God. I am dealing with this from start to finish. This is my show. I'm going to do this. And he's going to divide the nations and put all of humankind, including Israel, under the division of the watchers. These sons of God are angelic beings. They're higher in rank than angels, and they're part of the divine council. Go and read. I'm going to just give you some scriptures. I can't remember the verses, but I know I'm always looking for divine counsel language. You can see it clearly in 1 Kings chapter 22, where God is planning for the death of Ahab, and he's talking to the divine council, and he says, I have to paraphrase because I didn't memorize it. Okay, how are we going to do this? And this one of the member of the divine council steps forward and says, I know what we can do. I can go and I'll be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets. And he says, okay, that'll work. Go. And I just want you just to tune your ears into this worldview that includes this divine counsel. And I want you to start remembering it's in 1 King 22. I know Isaiah chapter number 6 has that language. Clearly, the 24 elders in Revelations 4 and 5 is divine counsel setting. And if you can compare it on your own time, I mean, just do a little study. Bring up Daniel chapter 7 and look at that chapter, and then look at John chapter number 4 in the book of Revelation, and you'll see it's almost word for word mirroring that the Ancient of Days, who's Yahweh, has a seat, and he is the Most High in this divine council setting. And and you'll see that Jesus appears as the Lamb in Revelation and also in Daniel. And so you're just starting to get the big picture about this world view. And the reason I put the Dia Marizo in there, because I apportioned it, just, it kind of like didn't pass my sniff test. So I started digging a little deeper into the Hebrew and then into the Greek. And there is where you start looking at it. And matter of fact, I know I haven't read all of Michael's book, but I guarantee it's in there. But he wrote a lot about the divine council. And if you haven't read the book, The Unseen Realm, I highly suggest you get it. It's just solid gold to me. But Dia Marizo, let's not get off track. I want you to think of the thorough division in there, okay? Because we're going to work our way down, and you're going to see that's the exact word that you're going to see Luke use when he writes about tongues of fire being thoroughly divided into this worldview. You'll see the divided tongues of fire are going to rest on people. They're going to speak in tongues, and then their voice is going to be heard all through Jerusalem, and 3,000 people are going to receive the hearing of the word of God, which is just code for they're going to receive faith to believe. You know this because when they come back, Luke says that they address the 120 as brothers. There's no way a Jew following Moses is going to address people that are praying in an unknowable tongue that are followers of Jesus. They would never call them brothers. But anyhow, let's just keep reading. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I want to isolate something for you, and I did a little research on this. I want you to think of the division of the family and just keep thinking about how sinister their objective is. Their objective in the Genesis 6 narrative is to take for themselves. And I want you to hear an echo in that, because that is almost word for word the same thing that was planted in the mind of Eve, or really she's Isha in Genesis. When she looks at the tree, what does she do? She sees what she wants and she takes for herself. I hope you see how that's a correlation between their seeing what they want, taking what they want. She sees what she wants, she takes what she wants. And I want you to see that because the objective, remember, it's Nazi Germany, it's Stalin's Soviet Union, it's Pol Pot's Cambodia. It's always the same pattern. Get the government to replace the family. God, thank you for creating. Thank you for being the head of our divine council. But we see something we want, we're going to take it for ourselves. We're going to create our own genetic code and create a race of beings that we're going to sire, and we're going to start our own bloodline. That's why the author says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. What the author is saying is they're not just giants in stature, they're giants in iniquity. They're the fallen. And what ends up happening is the author of Genesis, right on the back side of that, and starting in verse 5, he launches right into the flood narrative. So God sees that the thoughts and intentions of man's heart is evil. And what does he do? He says, okay, I'm going to flood the earth. And that, from that moment forward, you're into nothing but flood narrative all the way up until you get Genesis 10, where you have the table of nations on the backside of the flood. Then you get all these nations in chapter 10, and then God says, okay, now I'm going to carve out I'm going to kickstart the Eden project. Give me another man, give me another woman. I'm going to start my own family again, and I'm going to do it through Abraham and Sarah. That's why it's so important that you see that is the covenant that we want to import into the New Testament, because that fulfills the global work and not the law of Moses. The law of Moses had a beginning and an ending. You heard me talk for 6 years in Pauline teaching. The law of Moses has sunset. It's over. And him and James are doing this. Who's going to create the doctrine of the new covenant that is no longer on tablets of stone? How is this doctrine of the new Spirit administration going to create the doctrine that we're going to follow? James, he puts out his letter and says, here's the way we can have Moses and Jesus. Paul refutes that with his Galatian letter. Says, nope, there's no way the law of Moses is making it into this covenant. And so that's why I wrote the book Galatians up there. And it's a response letter to James, so that you can see this struggle. So God is moving away from, okay, I'm divorcing mankind at the Tower of Babel. There's where he divides the nations and he confounds the language, and he says, okay, I'm done. Now give me another man and another woman. All these little g gods, you can have the world. You can assemble it the way you want. You can rule over it. But now, initially, the idea was, watch how I lord over Abraham and Sarah and the nation of Israel. Watch my lead. And he's expecting them to govern accordingly, but it doesn't happen that way. That's why the whole Old Testament is Israel against all the other nations, the Philistines, Hittites, Moabites, Edomites, all that. It's Israel against the world and Yahweh against all the gods. Remember, you just have to retrain your ear. He said, did I not deliver you from the gods of Egypt? Don't think for a minute these gods of Egypt are just fictitious thing. No, they're these fallen angelic sons of God that you read about in Genesis 6. This is where you're at. This is the world view that they're understanding. And it's connected to Ephesians when Paul writes below there, when he talks about rulers and cosmic powers. You can clearly see, it's why I have it on one slide. I just want you to see this is the worldview in Deuteronomy, and it's exactly in harmony with Pauline teaching. And that's where we get our New Testament faith practice, because they want a genetic line of beings that are mixed. They're not supposed to. Remember, the sons of God are already eternal, but now they're mating with the temporal. And that's why all the Bible, every time you come across, God pointing his finger and saying, hey, don't sew that fabric with that fabric. No. We got one garment here. You're not going to put cotton and wool together. No. We don't mix. He's not mad at fabric. He's always in the back of his mind that the sons of God crossed the Rubicon. They took what God had created for temporal humanity to pass along their bloodline. The women were created in God's economy for human men. Human men and human women make human babies. And that's the way my bloodline continues. It's through procreation, through male to female. They took a spiritual, eternal being and mated with a temporal female. And that's why the female language is so important in your scriptures, and this melding, this mixing. That's why I said a long time ago, when you look at the lukewarm water that Jesus talks about, he says, I wish you were this or that, but because you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. It's echoing back to this. It has the idea of hot is one thing and cold is another. But when you start mixing them together, there's where you get something that's lukewarm, and it has to do with mixtures. And that's why, you just don't mix stuff. You don't put new wine in old skins, and on and on and on through the scriptures. You see mixture. And this is why Paul he's really getting into it in Galatians when he's talking about a little tiny bit of leaven. Leaven's the whole lump. And he's just making the connection with the idea of, he's speaking to James when he's writing it. He's not talking little sins, all you need. No. That's your church tradition of sin management kicking in. He's not talking about that. He's making a statement that the lump of dough in the new covenant is a dough lump of faith, Faith. If you bring this much of the law of Moses into the covenant of faith, you ruin it. And that's why James's retort is, faith without works is dead. Well, to James, works is the law of Moses. And Paul is saying, no one can be made righteous by the law. Don't think you have to force those scriptures to work together, or you're violating the inerrancy of Scripture. No, you're not. You're violating the inerrancy of Scripture when you force these scriptures to work together when they were written to give us contrast. God is allowing James's letter to be set on one side of the scale so Paul will start writing. If without James, Paul doesn't write. And so you see, let the text say what they say, and don't force them to say what they don't. And so you see this unholy mixture. And what is the objective? The objective is for the sons of God to become like the Most High God, where the government, just think of Nazi Germany. What did they want? They wanted to destroy the family so that the government is the solution. So people look to some other structure other than family. And it's in the structure of the family that God has always intended to be himself. He wants to reveal to us what he wants us to have, just like you with your children at the right time. You don't give a 3-year-old something you'd give to a 16-year-old. This is why the world's biblical narrative is filled with stories of chaos. It's because the leadership of the sons of God is not legitimate. That's why the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they wrote the Book of the Giants, and we discovered it in 1947, when they read the scrolls of the Book of the Giants, when the Essenes are writing it in like 200 BC, they're writing it, and when they come across the Nephilim, they called the Nephilim bastard spirits. Why would they go there? What was triggering in their mind? Well, they're saying they're just not supposed to marry these women. Their children are giants of iniquity, and they're bastards, and they're spiritual. That's the way they're talking about them between the testaments. Remember, it's between the two testaments that they're writing. And they're saying these are just not legitimate. And so when the flood happens and kills them, the disembodied spirit is what is permeating in the New Testament as demons. And this is why they're classified often as unclean spirits, because the unclean aspect has to do with the mingling, the mixture. So now, that's the whole idea. Let's get the right worldview, so when we pick our Bible up, we're reading it like it's supposed to be written. I want you to think about this. God has set this male-female thing, and it's a family structure. God is a father. Males and females make children. I was looking this up about, have we anything that we can look at in history other than, Pol Pot and the Nazi thing, and this government's desire to take over the family? And we didn't have to go that far back. And I was reading about the draft in America. Now, most people, I know a lot of my family can go back there because we were alive. But the last soldier was drafted in December of 1972. And Richard Nixon, in January the 12th, it was when he wrote out the manifesto of how we're going to dissolve the draft. Now keep this in mind, from 1940 to 1972, there's always been a draft. Now I want you to picture yourself. You remember we called the greatest generation, those men that fought in World War I. The next generation is the silent generation. And then you got your baby boomer generation. But I want you to think about this for a minute. Growing up with the idea that if you're born male, you have an obligation. You would grow up your whole life thinking, at a certain point in my life, it's most likely I'm going to end up fighting for my country. Young boys were raised with the idea that if I'm going to be male, I'm going to grow up and my primary duty is protection. This country has enemies. This world is filled with evil. And I have a duty that I am going to engage in the military, and men are going to be thinking in their minds that my primary duty is protection. January 22nd, 10 days later, now let this sink in, was when the Supreme Court rendered their decision in Roe v. Wade. So now get this shift in 73. Men are being told you no longer have to serve in the military, volunteers only. 10 days later, women are told your primary function of making babies, which is exactly the way God has ordained it, he's saying, yeah, that's no longer on the table. So I want you to think men are growing up now without the idea of serve and protect. And women are coming along and they're thinking, I don't even have to make babies. What is that if not an attack on the structure of the family? Is it just a coincidence and in the same month, men that have been trained for 30 years to grow up and enlist in an army and with the mindset of protection, women thinking my primary duty is to find me a husband and make a family? You think that it's a coincidence that the family structure was programmed to be dismantled during that time? From that moment to right now, everything about that silent generation and the roles of men and women have continually eroded until we get to where we are today. And here's the chaos. I want you to think about this. Nobody came along and told the men, instead of protecting, instead of taking your role as a defender, here's what you can do instead of that. Nothing offered. Men started thinking about themselves. It's all about me now. I don't have to be worried about taking care. Every man, there's not a man out there that has ever had a family that hasn't at some point in his marriage put his head in his hands and said, this would be so much easier if it was just me. But the attack, the assault, here's where you need to learn to think about the enemy. What is the telltale sign that they've got their fingers in something? It's always chaos. When you don't have Yahweh, you don't have the male doing what the male's supposed to do and the female doing what the female's supposed to do in the time and in the season that God had apportioned. What they do is they say, we're just going to dismantle what God starts, but we're not going to give women an alternative for this. We're not going to give men an alternative. We want them to become selfish in their making. We want them to look at themselves, and if they're a female, we want them to say, I am a strong, independent woman. I don't even need a man. I can get my own career. I don't have to make babies. That sound familiar to you? Or if you're a man, you know what? I don't need to go clubbing. I don't need to spend a lot of money trying to find a mate. You know what? We can have this hookup culture, and I can get what I want. She can get what you want. We can go our separate ways. And here's where we are today. We are the baby boomer generation's ready to retire. I'm part of it. And who's replacing us? Have you ever thought about every continent on this planet except one? I did the research, has got a terrible deficit of replacement people. There's simply not enough babies being born to replace the generation that's dying. Now think about that, how evil that is, if that is a plot. And it is a plot. So what is God's solution that he's given us for this sinister family treasonous act of these sons of God? I want to walk you through it because I want to get to the day of Pentecost, and I want you to see where the tongues were divided. I want you to see what God does with that. So, slide number 2, the all-seeing eye. What's it representing? You're right, Kevin. I heard you. The same worldview. We want to look into the scriptures and we want to see the Abraham covenant of the stars of God. We want to start recognizing Abraham's covenant all through scripture. Okay, choir, next slide. Jesus is the conductor. This is giving us this idea that, hey, look, we've got other bodies, Baptist, Catholics, Presbyterian. We don't agree on things, but almost all of them agree on Jesus being the conductor. He is the new leader of the high council. He said, all authority upon resurrection is now given to me in heaven and on earth. What's he saying? I am now the high council of God goes through me. The sons of God, see ya, wouldn't want to be ya. It's going through me now. I'm going to govern at the Father's right hand. I'm going to execute his will exactly on time according to his calendared events. And my judgments are final. There's no editing necessary, and only me. I know the will of the Father. That's what he did with the cup at the Last Supper. He said, I can't drink of that now. But he said, I'll drink it new. And he was referencing divine council setting when I am executing God's will that is in complete accord with every covenant he's ever made. Instead of being on tablets of stone, it's going to be delivered by tongues of fire. And we're going to walk through that. Next slide, slide number 4. That's a time period. Temple built, 516. Temple burned, 70 CE. I want you to get used to reading literature in that time period. And there are books of the Bible written in the midst of that too. A lot of the Old Testament, like Malachi is written in that time. Obadiah, Nahum is written in that time. If I'm not mistaken, maybe, no, I don't want to say that because I might be wrong. Okay, here's a new slide, simple. Slide number 5. I want you to see the replacement theology of God the Father. This thing was started with a power structure. At the very top, there is Yahweh. That is the Most High God. All sons of God in Hebrew are called Elohim, gods, but they're little g gods. All gods, which when they write about God Yahweh, they write about him and they say he's an Elohim. All I want you to get from this is there's one Yahweh creator. He's the creator of everything. He is the Father of Jesus, and below him in the ranking, the administrative sharing of his power. This is what he's telling us in that Deuteronomy or in Psalm 82, where he says He presides over the high council. What's he saying is God the Father, Yahweh, he's always shared his power. He's always shared. Mankind, you have dominion there, but these sons of God that I have up here, they're going to rule here according to my will. But both sets of sons, the spiritual sons of God and the earthly sons of God, they are all beneath Yahweh and Jesus. So when Paul starts writing about the sons of God, as many as are led by the Spirit, these are the sons of God. He's referencing divine counsel language. Let that language resonate. And then below the sons of God is the realm of the angels. Okay? They're messengers. That's what they are. Angels are messengers. We are in higher rank. We're higher rank. And the sons of God in that triangle, guess who's replacing them? That's what this is about. What God is doing is he's taking the original sons of God that had rebelled and he's replacing them. So when Paul starts to write about this beautiful thing that he launches in Acts chapter 2 with Jesus sitting on the throne, and he sends his Rhema words into our mouths, and those people that release them on earth as he releases them in heaven, this is divine counsel language, because that's what the sons of God did, and that's what we do. Those people who God is gifting with the presence of praying spiritually, they are taking up the places of the sons of God. So when Paul talks about suffering with Christ, that is his way of saying this is how we participate in the divine counsel. Okay, how much time we have left? Got plenty of time. Okay, move on. Move on to slide 7. Let me read this to you. Make it big on mine because I like this part. Acts chapter 2, verses 1 and 4. Let's read it together. And into the day of Pentecost, they were all to be filled together in the same place in person. We're on the backside of Jesus ascending. He's just finished telling his 11, I want you to get an assembly together. I want you to go up into an upper room, catch the elevated language. I want you to wait there for the promise of the Father. This is the reality of that day. And it says, and suddenly out from heaven, an echo carried per a violent wind, and it filled to completion the whole house. Remember, he's building a new thing where they were sitting, and they perpetually saw, and there's that word, dia marizo, thoroughly divided tongues being portioned to them as if of fire, and it sat on each one of them. And they were all completely filled by means of the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak in other different tongues, just as the Spirit was continually giving to speak away from the sound. Now, that's my translation. You guys have heard that a million times. What do I want you to get? I want you to connect this event with Deuteronomy 32 below. And it says, when the Most High apportioned, thoroughly divided the nations at his diaspero. This is a sowing. Now, I want you to see sparrow as a verb that means to sow a seed. I want you to see sowing seed. And the dia, you already know, that's thorough. These are not put there. It means I'm going to thoroughly divide the nations, and I'm going to thoroughly scatter all of the sons of humankind. I just imagine him taking Elamites, Parthians, and Medes. We're getting ready to read that next. But just imagine him sowing his seed globally. He's planting the seed. It's not harvest. The harvest is in Acts chapter 2. And he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of God. For Yahweh's portion was his people, Jacob the share of his inheritance. So what you're seeing in Acts chapter 2 is this: I divorced myself from humankind at the Tower of Babel. After the Tower of Babel, I divided the nations, 70 nations. Jesus is going to come along and send 70 apostles out in. It's harvest time. It's time for me to get my family back. But now, instead of having sons of God, here's my new divine counsel. These 120 are speaking the Rhema words. They're not speaking just anything. They're sending out faith into a collection of people that's in Jerusalem. Look at the next slide. It's slide number 9. Look what it says. And they were confused because they were hearing them speaking in their uniquely own dialect. Now that word confused, it's the exact same word that when God said he came down and looked at the building of the ziggurat, the Tower of Babel, what was he doing? He was saying, this is where I am confusing their language. Right here is when he's retracted the lease that he gave to the sons of God. He said, you have no more authority. Now it's time for me to reach back into the community of the nations through this new 120. These are the new divine council. And it says, and they were confused, and catch the language, because they were hearing them speaking in their own dialect. But they were existemi. That's that Greek word. And I want you to see this. The word ek means out, and the word histemi means standing. You ever hear somebody say, I was just beside myself? That's the idea. They were beside themselves. They were out of their minds because God was once again speaking, sowing faith into the seeds of the nations. And look at who. Remember, he scattered the nations in Genesis 11. Look at who's in town for this new move of God. And they were amazed, saying, we hear all them, these speaking, are not every one Galileans? And how are we each actively hearing in our own dialect in which we were born? Look at the map. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Syria, or Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and Jewish converts, Cretians and Arabians. Don't think for a minute Luke's just saying, I'll just throw, a handful of nations out there. No, he's making a statement that these people are hearing, they're receiving faith to believe, and God is planting them back in their home cities as evangelists. The move of God is now faith-based. They have received their measure of faith, and they received it because God released it through his new divine counsel. And he says, we hear them, and we hear them speaking the greatness of God, but they were all beside themselves, and they could find no solution, saying to one another, what does God desire this to be? The translation, I think one translation says, what do we do with this, or something like that? But no, this is the right translation. And here's all I want you to get from this is just now you see the connection of the divided nations, solution, the divided tongues. Now you've got these people in here, and Jesus says, You're going to be my witnesses here in Jerusalem, Samaria, the outer parts of the world. Here's the fulfillment. Now you'd say to yourself, well, there is no representation of Samaria here. What does the writer of Acts lead us to Philip? Where does Philip go next? Philip goes to Samaria. And then what happens after Samaria? He meets up with a eunuch, and he takes his encounter to Africa, to Ethiopia. Then the Spirit picks him up, carries him to Azotus. Where was Azotus in the map of things? It was Philistine territory. It was the one place David never took. In his kingdom, that was the last place. And if you get back down to it, Paul ends up making a statement, and I can't remember which one. I remember Mike Heiser teaching about this. I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to try to get it right. Paul's desire to go to, sorry about this, church, I just got off work. Paul's desire was to make it to Spain. And, I didn't make the connection, Mike did, and I'm grateful he did, because if you look at the map of where Spain sets, it used to be called Tarshish. And that is where Spain sets today, and that's the farthest point before you exit through where the Rock of Gibraltar is in Spain. Once you go through that canal, you're into the Atlantic Ocean. To that generation, that was the uninhabitable chaos of the world. Paul was saying, my job is not done until I get to Spain. And he was just determined, I've got to get to Spain, because God's work was launched, retaking back the nations, and he was doing it through faith, through people of faith. And hey, that's where I left off. So anyhow, I just wanted you to see how the day of Pentecost, I want you to see the connection with the divided tongues, the divided nations. I wanted you to see the confusion. That's the only place you're going to find that, I believe, that where it says, and they were bewildered. That's the exact same word that the Septuagint authors used when it says that he confused the language. They were bewildered. So anyhow, I hope this gives you new life into reading your scriptures. Hey, if you're not praying in the Spirit, if you're not praying in the tongues, here's Paul's message. For 6 years, I taught this. The open invitation to Pauline doctrine is that God's initial work, like you see right here, get the measure of faith. This is weak faith. Every time Paul talks about when I'm weak, this is when I'm strong. Every time Paul talks about weak, he's talking about the faith, the initial investment the Father gives us of faith, transforms us into the children of God out from under the family. Who's in charge of the gods of this world? They are. You're no longer under the gods of this world. Now you're in the family. And he makes an invitation. Now that you are in the right family, you can become part of the speaking priesthood. And you can become part of the royal priesthood. You can speak in other tongues. You're compatible with the new kingdom. You're in the right family. Faith, when it's weak, is what makes you a child of God. Faith, when it's strong, is what occurs when you are letting God use your organs of speech. He said, when I'm strong, he's referencing praying in these unknowable utterances. He's saying that's when I'm strong. And that's the purpose for faith, to get you out from under the kingdom of this world into the right family of God. And then you have an open invitation. And what helps people make it from weak faith to strong faith is right teaching. And that's what I believe the Lord's helped me to do. All right. Love you. We're 1 minute away from our hour. We'll see you next week. Lord bless you.